I heard them decide my fate through a door that was not fully closed. It was a habit of mine, existing in the spaces others forgot, in the sliver of shadow by a doorway or the quiet corner of a drawing room. I was Alara Vance, the second daughter, the plain one, a creature of muted tones in a house that prized the vibrant hues of my sister Rosamond. My stepmother's voice, sharp and brittle as spun sugar, cut through the low murmur of my father's indecision. Harrington has cried off. We are ruined, utterly ruined, unless the Duke of Blackwood can be persuaded. Rosamond is our only hope. She is a diamond of the first water. My father, a man whose spine had long since dissolved under the acid of his wife's ambition, made a sound of weak protest. And Alara? A pause, then the dismissive click of my stepmother's tongue. Alara will be there. The contract stipulates a daughter of the house. It does not stipulate which one he must see first. She will serve the tea. It will make Rosamond's grace all the more apparent by contrast. She is useful in that, at least. Useful as a shadow is useful to light, I thought. I did not feel anger, only the familiar, dull ache of acceptance. I was the gray dove kept to make the peacock's plumage seem more brilliant. My existence was a backdrop for another's beauty, a silence to make another's laughter sound sweeter. This had always been my reality, and I had learned long ago not to struggle against the confines of the world they had built for me. I simply retreated further into myself, into the pages of my books, where heroines were valued for their wit and their courage, not the curve of their cheekbone. The Duke of Blackwood was a name spoken in hushed, reverent tones throughout the county. A man of immense wealth and ancient title, he was also a figure of tragedy and seclusion. His first wife, a celebrated beauty, had died in a riding accident some years prior, and he had since remained entombed in his great stone fortress of an estate, Blackwood Manor, emerging only when necessity demanded. He was said to be severe, cold, a man carved from the same granite as his ancestral home. When he arrived, the entire household held its breath. He was taller than I had imagined, with a presence that seemed to absorb the very light in our faded drawing room. He did not smile. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept the room with an unnerving stillness. As instructed, I moved from the shadows to perform my designated role. I was a ghost in a gray dress, my hands steady as I poured the tea. My stepmother was a whirlwind of brittle smiles and saccharine pleasantries, while Rosamond, breathtaking in a gown of pale rose silk, was positioned like a porcelain doll on a velvet tray, perfect and silent. The Duke's attention, by all rights, should have been entirely on her. And yet, as I offered him his cup, my hand faltered for a fraction of a second. A single, trembling drop of hot water escaped the saucer and landed on the dark leather of his glove. Mortification, hot and swift, flooded my veins. I murmured an apology, my eyes fixed on the offending spot. "It is nothing," he said. His voice was deeper than I had expected, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air. I risked a glance upward, prepared for the cool dismissal I knew so well. But that is not what I found. He was looking at me. Not a glance, not the polite sweep of the eyes one gives a servant, but a direct, focused, and profoundly unsettling gaze. It was as if he had peeled back the layers of my invisibility and was examining the person beneath. His eyes did not assess my plain features or my simple gown. They seemed to be measuring something else entirely. My composure, the steadiness of my hands now that the initial tremor had passed, the way I held myself in the face of my small, public humiliation. It was the first time in my life a man had looked at me as if I were a puzzle to be solved, rather than a piece of furniture to be ignored. In that moment, the carefully constructed script of the afternoon was torn asunder. The world tilted on its axis, and I felt a strange, terrifying flutter of something I could not name. It was the feeling of being seen. He broke the silence that had fallen, his gaze finally leaving my face to land on a bookshelf near the hearth. "That is a fine edition of Marcus Aurelius," he said, his voice directed not to my father, the supposed master of the house, but to me. "Do you find his stoicism a comfort or a challenge, Miss Vance?" My stepmother's smile froze on her face. Rosamond blinked, her perfect rosebud mouth slightly agape. My father simply stared. I, who was meant to be silent, had been asked a question about philosophy by a duke. "I find it a necessary armor, Your Grace," I managed to reply, my voice barely a whisper. A flicker of something, interest perhaps, moved in the depths of his cool gray eyes. He gave a single, slow nod. The tea was forgotten. The performance was over. Something new had begun. The following week, a note arrived from Blackwood Manor. The Duke requested the pleasure of the Misses Vance for a walk in the gardens of his estate. My stepmother was ecstatic, certain that Rosamond's beauty had captivated him, despite the awkwardness of his first visit. She spent 2 days planning Rosamond's attire, a confection of muslin and lace designed to evoke the innocence of a woodland nymph. My own preparations were simpler. I wore my best walking dress, a serviceable dark blue wool, and ensured my boots were sound. I was to be the chaperone, the silent companion, the foil once more. The gardens at Blackwood were magnificent, a breathtaking tapestry of formal parterres and wild, rambling woodlands. Yet the Duke led us not to the spectacular rose gardens, but to a series of experimental plots near the estate's home farm. Rosamond, teetering on impractical slippers, looked utterly bewildered as he began to speak of crop rotation and the new Dutch plows he had imported. "The yield from this field has increased by 1/3 since we introduced the 4-course system," he stated, gesturing with a gloved hand. He turned, his gaze once again bypassing my sister to settle on me. "Your father's lands, I have observed, suffer from soil exhaustion. Has he considered the use of clover to replenish the nitrogen?" It was a test, I knew. He was probing the edges of my mind, searching for the person who had answered his question about Aurelius. My stepmother shot me a look of pure venom, a silent command to be stupid, to defer, to disappear. But the Duke's question was a key turning in a lock I had not known was there. For years, I had read my father's agricultural journals, fascinated by the science and strategy of managing an estate, a subject deemed entirely unsuitable for a young lady. "Clover would be a start, Your Grace," I said, finding a surprising confidence in my own voice. "But the soil on the south-facing slope is too acidic. It would need lime before any real improvement could be seen, and the drainage in the lower meadow is a constant problem." He stopped walking. He turned to face me fully, and for a long moment, he simply studied me, his expression unreadable. Rosamond was now actively pouting, and my stepmother looked as though she might spontaneously combust from sheer rage. But in the Duke's eyes, I saw that flicker again, stronger this time. It was not admiration, not yet. It was recognition. He had sent out a signal into the quiet darkness where I lived, and I had answered. We spoke for another hour about drainage tiles and livestock breeding, our conversation a strange and wonderful island in a sea of my family's baffled fury. When he returned us to our carriage, he bowed formally to Rosamond, but his final glance was for me. "I find myself valuing your perspective, Miss Vance," he said, and the simple words were more intoxicating than any flowery compliment I could have imagined. His visits became a regular occurrence, and each time the pretense that he was courting Rosamond grew thinner. He would endure the requisite 10 minutes of polite chatter in the drawing room before finding a reason to draw me into a separate conversation, often in the library, the one room in our house I truly loved. We spoke of history, of poetry, of the moral complexities of governance. He listened to my opinions with a grave intensity that made me feel as though my words had weight and value. He lent me books from his own vast collection, volumes of philosophy and science that my stepmother would have deemed dangerously unfeminine. In those hours, surrounded by the quiet company of books, I felt myself expanding, unfurling like a plant that had been kept too long in the dark. I knew my stepmother was growing desperate. Her whispers behind my back grew more pointed, her glares more frequent. I was an aberration, a disruption to her carefully laid plans. I was often sent to my room, or to the small, drafty morning room at the back of the house, under the guise of some invented chore, to keep me away from him. It was in that cold little room that I received his first true gift. I had been shivering all afternoon, a thin shawl wrapped around my shoulders, doing little to ward off the chill that seeped through the window panes. When I returned from a brief errand, a thick, impossibly soft cashmere shawl lay folded across the back of my chair. It was the color of wood smoke, elegant and warm, and there was no note, no indication of its origin. But I knew. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. He had noticed my discomfort. He had seen my small, private misery and had acted to alleviate it, quietly and without fanfare. I pressed the soft wool to my cheek, and it felt like a promise. Kindness, I had learned, was a rare commodity, and the anonymous sort was the rarest of all. It came with no expectation of thanks, no public acknowledgement. It was a message sent from one quiet soul to another. Our connection, however intellectual, was still bound by the rigid rules of propriety. We were never truly alone. But one afternoon in the library, a moment occurred that transcended those rules. We were discussing Virgil, and he moved to a high shelf to retrieve a particular commentary. I, seeing the volume he was reaching for, stepped forward to point it out. At the exact same moment, he turned, and we found ourselves standing impossibly close, the space between us charged with a sudden, palpable energy. His scent, a clean mix of leather and winter air, filled my senses. I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the disciplined set of his jaw. He reached for the book, and so did I. Our fingers brushed against the worn leather spine, a fleeting, electric touch that sent a jolt straight to my heart. We both froze. The air in the library, usually so still and scholarly, seemed to hum. He did not pull away. His gaze dropped to our hands, then rose to meet mine. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, to the unspoken question hanging in the air between us. It was a moment of pure, terrifying, and exhilarating intimacy, more powerful than any embrace. He drew his hand back slowly, his knuckles grazing my own one last time. "Forgive me," he murmured, his voice slightly hoarse. But his eyes said something else entirely. The following Tuesday, he found me alone in the garden, ostensibly reading, but in truth simply replaying that moment in the library over and over in my mind. He dispensed with the usual pleasantries. "Miss Vance," he began, his tone serious, "my title is a cage. It is a set of expectations and duties that I have borne my entire life. I should like it if you, at least, saw the man inside." He paused, his gaze steady and direct. "I would be honored if, when we are away from the prying eyes of others, you would consent to call me Alistair." Alistair. His name felt foreign and yet perfectly right on my tongue. To use a man's given name, especially a duke's, was a breach of etiquette so profound as to be unthinkable. It was a signal of a deep and personal connection, a step across a threshold from which there was no return. It was a seismic event, and my heart hammered against my ribs as I considered the weight of his request. It was an offering of trust, a piece of himself laid bare. "And you," I replied, my voice softer than I intended, "must call me Alara." A slow smile touched his lips, a rare and beautiful thing that transformed his severe features. "Ilara," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. And in the quiet garden, with the scent of damp earth and late-blooming roses around us, a new compact was sealed, not with ink and wax, but with the simple, revolutionary intimacy of our names. 3 days later, the Duke of Blackwood made a formal offer of marriage to my father, for my hand. The shock in our household was a tangible thing. My stepmother turned a sickly shade of white, and Rosamond, to her credit, looked more relieved than disappointed. My father, flustered and overwhelmed, accepted immediately. I felt a dizzying mix of terror and elation. I was to be the Duchess of Blackwood. I, the quiet shadow, was to be mistress of that great estate. It felt like a dream, a fairy tale written in a language I was only just beginning to understand. The solicitors arrived 2 days before the wedding, stern men in dark coats carrying portfolios of documents. While my father was engaged with the primary marriage contract, a gust of wind from an open window dislodged a smaller, separate folder from the pile. A single sheet of vellum slid out and came to rest near my feet. I bent to retrieve it, and my eyes caught the heading, Deed of Loan and Forbearance. My blood ran cold. I read the document with a growing sense of horror. It was a loan agreement, signed by my father, pledging the entirety of the Vance estate as collateral. The lender was Alistair, Duke of Blackwood. The final clause was a knife to the heart. The full and complete forgiveness of the debt was conditional upon the successful marriage of a daughter of the House of Vance to the aforementioned Duke. The world dissolved into a sickening gray fog. Every kind word, every shared look, every thoughtful gesture was instantly recontextualized. The book, the shawl, the conversations about soil and philosophy, were they all part of a calculated performance? Was I not a woman he desired, but a commodity he was acquiring? A price paid for my foolish father's debts? The kindness I had treasured now felt like a clever piece of bait. The intellectual connection felt like a meticulous strategy to win the compliance of the strange, bookish daughter. The crisis of trust was absolute. He had not seen me. He had appraised me. I felt a fool, a naive child who had mistaken a business transaction for a love story. The pain was so sharp, so deep, it stole the air from my lungs. I requested a private audience with him that evening, in the very library where our connection had felt so real. I did not weep. My grief was a cold, hard stone in my chest. He entered the room with that rare, soft smile on his face, a smile that now looked like a mask. I waited until he had closed the door, and then I placed the deed of loan on the polished mahogany table between us. I did not have to speak. His eyes fell to the document, and the smile vanished. A look of profound pain and something like weariness replaced it. "Was this the price for my hand, Your Grace?" I asked, my voice devoid of all emotion. I had reverted to his title, and I saw him flinch, as if I had struck him. He did not deny it. He sank into the chair opposite me, his broad shoulders slumping. "The debt was the reason I came here, Alara," he admitted, his voice low and ragged. "It is not the reason I asked for you." He explained the situation, how my father had approached him years ago, desperate after a series of catastrophic investments. Alistair had agreed to the loan out of a sense of duty to a neighboring family. The marriage clause had been my father's desperate suggestion, a way to permanently solve his financial woes. "My intention," Alistair continued, his eyes pleading with me to understand, "was to fulfill the contract. I planned to offer for Rosamond a sensible and beautiful choice. I would forgive the debt, secure the succession of my title with a suitable wife, and then retreat back into the life I had made for myself." He looked up at me, his face a mask of raw honesty. "Everything else was a catastrophe I did not plan for. You, Alara, you were the catastrophe." He confessed that he had expected a dull, tedious transaction. He had not expected to find a mind that challenged his, a quiet strength that intrigued him, a soul that seemed to resonate with his own loneliness. "I did not account for you," he whispered. "I came to inspect a property and found myself discovering a home." As he spoke, he revealed more. He was aware of my stepmother's machinations, of the cruel whispers that had already begun to circulate, suggesting I had somehow trapped him. "I have already taken steps," he said, his voice regaining some of its usual command. "I have spoken with my aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Abernathy. I have told her I sought a partner for my mind as well as my life, and that I had found her in the most unexpected of places. I have ensured that when you enter society as my wife, you do so not as a mystery or a compromise, but as my chosen and valued partner." He had been protecting me, building a fortress of reputation around me before I even knew I was under siege. His proactive defense was a more powerful argument than any denial. It was the action of a man who cared not just for his own honor, but for mine. Then came the confession that shattered the last of my defenses. He spoke of his first wife, of a marriage that had been a polite arrangement of convenience and duty. There had been respect, but no real connection. Her death had left him not with the agony of lost love, but with the hollow guilt of relief, a shame he had carried in silence for years. "I built walls so high I thought no one could ever scale them," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He rose from his chair and came to stand before me, not reaching for me, but simply offering his vulnerability as a final piece of evidence. I did not account for someone with the quiet patience to simply find the gate. "You have unmade me, Alara. My every thought has become a question of what you would think of it. My solitude, which was once my shield, has become an empty room because you are not in it. The debt is a sordid, ugly thing. But my feelings for you, they are the truest thing I have known." I looked into his eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, and I saw the truth. It was there in the unguarded pain, in the desperate hope, in the raw sincerity of his words. The stone of grief in my chest began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile, burgeoning warmth. I had spent my life as an observer, a silent witness to the lives of others. I had resigned myself to that role. I had believed, I said, my voice trembling slightly, that my life was to be a book read only by myself. You were the first person who ever asked to turn a page. I rose and stood before him, a partner in this new, terrifying emotional landscape. I accepted his proposal again, not as the fulfillment of a contract or the forgiveness of a debt, but as a conscious choice, a leap of faith into a future that was suddenly, dazzlingly bright with possibility. Our alliance was forged, not against my family, but against the shadows of our pasts. Our wedding was a quiet affair, but the reception at his London townhouse was a grand spectacle, a necessary announcement to society that the Duke of Blackwood had returned to the world. The room glittered with jewels and bristled with gossip. I stood by my husband's side, my hand resting on his arm, a tangible anchor in the overwhelming sea of faces. My stepmother was there, her face a pinched mask of fury, with a bitter Lord Harrington hovering nearby. I knew they would not allow the evening to pass without incident. The moment came when Alistair was drawn away to speak with a government minister. Lady Vance, seeing her opportunity, cornered the formidable Dowager Duchess of Abernathy, Alistair's aunt, a woman whose opinion could make or break a reputation with a single, well-placed word. My stepmother's voice, though pitched to sound confidential, carried with practiced ease. A strange match, is it not? The poor girl is a cunning schemer, you know, used her father's unfortunate debts as leverage. She is plain and penniless, a desperate creature who would do anything to secure her position. He was trapped, utterly trapped. Before the Dowager Duchess could even arch a skeptical eyebrow, Alistair was there. He moved with a silent grace that was startling in a man his size. He did not raise his voice. He did not betray a flicker of anger. He simply looked at my stepmother with a chilling calm. Indeed, Lady Vance. Let us speak of desperation. He produced a small, folded letter from his waistcoat pocket. This, I believe, is your handwriting? A letter to Lord Harrington, outlining a rather creative plan to have my marriage annulled on grounds of my wife's supposed instability, so that Rosamond might be offered as a more suitable replacement. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled guests. He was not finished. I also have a statement from your husband's solicitor, detailing the rather astonishing gambling and dressmaking debts you accrued, which necessitated the loan in the first place. My wife did not trap me with a debt, madam. You created it with your own reckless ambition. Humiliated and exposed, my stepmother turned her venom on me, her face contorted with rage. She spat the words like poison. You will never be her equal. You are a pale substitute for his first wife, and he will tire of you. He will always see you as a consolation, a second best. A profound calm settled over me. All my life, I had been silent. I had absorbed the insults, endured the dismissals, but I was not that person anymore. I was the Duchess of Blackwood. I was Alistair's wife. I was Ilara. I met her hateful gaze without flinching, and my voice, when it came, was clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent ballroom. You are mistaken, I said, not to her, but to the world. I am not a substitute for anyone. My husband did not choose me for my face or my dowry, for he had his choice of any beauty in England. He chose me for my mind and for my heart. I turned to look at my husband, who was watching me with an expression of such profound love and pride that it took my breath away. That is a currency with which you appear to be entirely unacquainted. The fall was swift and absolute. My stepmother's social ruin was complete. My father, a man defined by his inaction, simply took her arm and escorted her from the room and from my life.